24/7. 24/7.
Bold Moves Radio.
Bold Moves Radio.
Afrika nakupenda sana. Oh, Afrika nakupenda sana.
Good evening. It's live SA through Bold Moves Radio. Once again, as always, we are here with you until 7, sharing with you and encouraging you about how we should go about making our country a better country that we all seek to see it becoming. And as always, or as you have become accustomed to, I'm with my co-host Moses Ngobeni, who will be alongside me, ably assisting me to see to it that this show lives up to its expectation, that is getting the message across. Moses, you want to say hi to our viewers and listeners across all social media platforms, that is Facebook and YouTube, as they join us, as they loyally do so as before. Ngobeni?
A very good evening to our Bold Moves radio listeners and viewers. We thank you once again for joining us this evening. We are looking forward, yes, to a lovely show. We thank you again for your loyalty. We thank you for joining us tonight. We thank you for the continuous support that you continue to show to this lovely program that is Love SA. We are with you every Thursday evening, broadcasting live on Facebook and on YouTube. The radio station is Bold Moves. The program is Love SA. We promise again a very beautiful program. We have a lovely guest that is joining us that we're looking forward to engaging with him on some very important issues. So we say to you, stay tuned. Looking forward to a great show ahead. MANGANYI.
You know, Ngoben, we must do away with routine. As always, I would get into the business of introducing the guest for the day, but this evening we are doing it differently. I would want to let you do this task, and I know that you will be able to do it to the love of our listeners, the love of our viewers, and that you should be in a position to take us through these guests that we have for this evening.
Absolutely. It's a mammoth task that you are giving me, but I hope that I'm very much prepared for it. But without wasting any more time, what I've done is I'm going to do a bit of reading because his CV is quite extensive. And during my preparations, I realized that if I just take out some of the things that he is currently doing or that he has done in the past, I would not be doing him justice. He's a man that I would ordinarily give the platform to so that he can introduce himself to the viewers. But I'm more than happy to do the honors. Look, our guest for tonight, to our lovely viewers, is someone who is very much engaged to this very date. The name is David Kabwa. For those who are still in academics, the name might sound very much familiar because he was an SRC president for 2 consecutive years at the University of Pretoria. So David Kabwa is the president of MOVE, a new youth-led political party that will be contesting in the 2024 national elections. He is currently pursuing a PhD in international relations at the University of Pretoria under the Center for Mediation in Africa. He is currently serving as the country's ambassador for South Africa to Unite 2030 initiative. He is currently serving as, he is also moreover, he is an inaugural member of the African Union for Transitional Justice Continental Platform, where he was trained as a youth expert in the youth, where he was trained as a youth expert in African transitional justice policy by the AU Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security. He is currently a national Fundi influencer. In 2019, he was elected as the Prime Minister for the Commonwealth Youth Parliament. He was the first African elected to this position, where he would oversee the legislative affairs of young people across 54 countries. He has also served 2 consecutive terms as the Student Representative Council President for the University of Pretoria, as an independent candidate. I should put some emphasis on that, where he would oversee over 60,000 students across 7 campuses. I'm growing a bit tired reading this CV. It's extensive. And this tired, I mean tired in a very good way. In any event, Mr. Kabwa has also served as the chairperson of Minimum Wage Commission in Gauteng Youth Sector Parliament and was the first-year student elected to chair the Faculty of House at the University of Pretoria. He has also been inducted into the Mail and Guardian Top 200 Youth South Africans and the Junior Chamber International International Top 10 Outstanding Young Persons in South Africa in the category of politics. In 2021, he was an inaugural recipient of Hope Givers Foundation in association with Brand South Africa and the National Lotteries Commission Raising Legends Award in category of academia, advocacy, leadership for work down to combat gender-based violence through the Boy Child Initiative. He was also the inaugural recipient of the University of Pretoria Faculty of Humanities Dean's Award, which is now conferred to students with outstanding contributions to the faculty. He is also a 2-time South African national medalist in the South African Modern Pentathlon Association Laser Run and world champion gold medalist of the Union de Pentathlon Modern Laser Run. Look, as I indicated, the CV is quite extensive, and I believe Mr. David Kabwa is now online with us. He has joined us. I decided to rather not kind of fragment his CV to specific parts that we want to focus on today, but rather take our viewers through each and every part of the stuff that he's been involved in and that he continues to be involved in. In reading his CV, I cannot draw my mind from the words that we found in the book of Luke, chapter 1, verse 37, which says, "For with God nothing shall be impossible." And I want to take this short moment and discuss this, because I would understand Mr. Kabwa was raised from a Christian background, and I'm not imposing Christianity upon our viewers. I am a Christian myself. Everyone has a right of choice when it comes to their religion. But that book tells us that for with God, nothing shall be impossible. And that tempted me to read a certain quote by the great Muhammad Ali, may his soul rest in peace, which says, "Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easy to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power that they have to change it." Impossible is not a fact. It is an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration. It is nothing. It's a dead. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Mr. David, we welcome you to the show tonight.
He should be rejoining us, with load shedding and everything associated with that. From time to time, we experience glitches, but that should not stop us from proceeding with what we have just started. He should be with us anytime now, thanks to the competency of our technical team. Yes, and you can carry on, Goveni, a bit more with what you may have as part of his introduction. You are doing a great job, I must say. Impressed with the CV myself, and I was wondering at some stage that where on earth does it get all the time to do all these things? It's so much for a young man of his age.
I mean, quite honestly, anyone in their right senses of mind after hearing such an extensive CV would definitely ask themselves, where on earth does he get the time to do everything that he's doing, whilst at the same time he's a PhD student, which is equally demanding.
And Goveni, you can see that he is doing a lot, but he's back with us, so you can just carry on with what you aimed to kickstart with as we go ahead with the program.
Mr. David, we welcome you to the show. Thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you giving our viewers this time.
We should be able to continue smoothly with our guest tonight. It's just this and that, again, associated with what we are now used to. It's Mr. David Kabwa. You know, Ngoben, something very interesting about his name and the surname. If you check the components or building blocks of both his name and surname, I've counted there. The building blocks for the name, it's 7, and similarly of his surname, it's 7. And you know, that when I look at it, for me, it represents a balanced man that he appears to be.
Definitely, definitely. Look, in preparing for the show and with the quote that I've just read, I couldn't help but try to summarize what I had come to conclude to say. Here we see a young man whose life is very much symbolized by defying odds, achieving at a very young age what would often be regarded as unattainable at that very age. That man is David Kabwa. I think he's a personification of what I've just quoted, the words of the great Muhammad Ali. I cannot think of anything beyond that. What do you have to say, Kabwa?
I think just carry on with him, because I see he's back with us. He just can't wait to dish out what we have been looking forward to. And of course, our listeners and viewers, similarly.
Mr. David, welcome to the show. Can you confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, I can. I do apologize for the technical difficulties currently experiencing what many South Africans are undergoing, and that is the unfortunate reality of load shedding. But I'm hoping I'm coming across clearly now, and once again, grateful to be here. Happy to speak to you and your listeners.
Look, it's the unfortunate reality that we are living in, honestly. And with someone who's young and upcoming, such as you, we are looking forward to great leadership in the near future that will save us from such things that we are going through right now, I must say.
Greatly looking forward to that as well.
And Mr. Kabwa, I'm looking at all the achievements that has been presented to us, and together with the listeners or viewers this evening by my co-host Moses Ngobeni. And I'm saying to myself that, look, we see all these, and very impressive, we must say, but it has to start somewhere. Personally, I believe that schooling and everything that is associated with it, and further learning, has a foundation from what starts at home. My question to you is, what is it that started at home from which formal education in a structured format could take from to produce a product such as you that South Africa is so proud of?
I really appreciate that, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic question. And I like the question because it is a question of a genesis, which is always the very foundation, the beginning of what goes on to form us. Now, for me, my particular background is very fascinating in that my father grew up in a village where he got his first pair of shoes at age 25. My mother came from a much more well-off background, but they came to South Africa with very, very little, next to nothing. And I've watched them develop and grow and overcome unmeasurable odds. And for me, the two things that I've taken from my very origin and my foundation, first of all, from my mother, she once told me that, well, son, I could give you gold and silver, but all of these things, they belong to God. So what I give you is a relationship with Jesus. And for me, that is the very core and the foundation of my being. I believe that each and every one of us are entitled to our own beliefs and our own systems of how we identify and even self-identify. But for me, this is a very core component of my identity. Now, from my dad, what I learned was the importance of hard work. He once told me that the greatest talent that any human being possesses is hard work. And based on these two facsimiles, I developed a saying, and I wrote this in a speech a while ago. And if you ever hear me on a platform, you know what I'm about to say. That is that we possess the capacity and the capability to loosen the shackles of mediocrity that have bound so many to complacency. So when you get your mind right, you get up and you say, I will not be defeated, denied, or disgraced, because every single day we have the opportunity to make a difference. And this is what I've taken from my background, my foundation moving forward.
Wow. I almost said I'm speechless, but I can't go speechless because I have to carry on with the program. Otherwise, what a disappointment will be for our listeners that we can't carry on with a man of this stature. You have just said a mouthful. And I must say, if we're to carry on, that we need to trace that turning point at some childhood that comes across as a point of reference to say, at this point, I can trace my leadership. I'm the manifestation of my leadership, which subsequently saw me emerging a leader that I'm greatly becoming. What will be that turning point, Mr. Kabwa?
Again, I think it's a really great question, and I'm going to give a response that I think so many of us share, particularly in the space of leadership. And for me, that turning point was one of failure. Again, I'll reference my parents. My father is a medical doctor. He's a specialist, got his master's degree in family medicine. And I remember as a child watching him, all I ever wanted to do was help people. It is my driving force. It is what keeps me awake all night in most instances. So I remember looking at my dad and saying, okay, well, he goes out and he saves lives all day. I want to help people, so this seems like it's a profession. When I was growing up, they used to call me Dr. Dave. And since I'm studying towards a PhD, I'll be a doctor, just not the kind anyone had expected. Now, I was very confident as a high school learner. I was the king of high school. I was on every committee. I was a prefect. Literally, I think it's now about 7 years later, I still hold the record for the highest amounts of votes in my school's prefect election history. Now, the issue then came in that I was so confident, and when I had applied for higher learning, the only thing I applied for was medicine, because I was a top 10 learner, and I firmly believe that there is absolutely nothing that can derail me. And then matric happened, and I saw flames. And this was one of the most crushing moments of my life. I remember going from being the man that everyone admired, the young man with a great future that everyone is excited to see. And I went from that to being just the guy that peaked in high school. And this was absolutely a heartbreaking moment. And I come from a small community in Bopo. So when I would go out for groceries, I would take out the trash and just simple, ordinary, everyday activities, I could get the sense that, that level of disappointment. So I had two options. The one was go and pursue a BSc degree and hope to get into medicine that route, and the other was to go and upgrade my matric. So now I come from being a rather respected person in the community. I was in the town newspapers every second week. And all my friends are going to varsity, and I'm going back to high school to upgrade my marks. And I'll never forget that day sitting there. I got my timetable. And learners who might be in matric right now will know that feeling, the first day of the new term when you get your timetable. That's where things really start to become real. So where I went to go and upgrade, I upgraded my results in Pretoria. I'm from Limpopo. I moved to Pretoria to upgrade my results. And I remember my very first day, I walked straight into the principal's office and I said, "Hi, my name is David, and I'd like to speak to your learners." And he gives me the most confused look and he says, "Oh, young man, you realize we're about to have an assembly? I said, yes, I do. He says, well, we already planned for this assembly. I said, no, I am very well aware of that. Give me a chance and you'll be surprised. And he said, I think more out of amusement, he agrees. So I step on the stage, I give a roaring speech, and I got a standing ovation for about a 30-second kind of tidbit. So now, first person approaches me, hey, great speech, man. Let's go out and we're going to enjoy ourselves, man. We're going to get some drinks. It's going to be cool. I said, okay, well, great. I don't drink, but I'd be more than happy to go out and enjoy your company. I said, well, shucks, man, it's all good. We'll roll up something. We'll smoke a bit. We'll have a good time still. And I said, okay, great. Let's go out and enjoy ourselves. But, not really my vibe, but I'd still really be happy to hang out with you. They said, well, F, man, what do you do? And I said, well, F, man, I don't know. They said, well, F, man, you won't say F. And I said, oh, I don't swear. What do you mean? He said, well, you're a young person. You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't swear. That makes you a liar. There's no young person alive who doesn't at least do one of those three. And while I went and sat down, because at this point I became ostracized. I remember at some point people physically came to spit in my shoes. I don't know if you've ever watched another human being prepare to spit on your shoes. It is a very strange occurrence. So I spent my time speaking to the cleaning staff and gardeners and such. And one day I saw learners going on a bus. I had no clue where they were going. So it's like, well, I don't seem to have much to do here, so let me see where this bus is going. When the bus arrives at its destination, I look up and I find myself at the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. And I had then found out that they were running a program for the Children's Parliament. And at that age, I was 18, so technically qualified as a child. To make a very long story short, I got into the room, and because I wasn't really supposed to be there, I sat at the back with someone's younger sibling. He then asked, well, does anyone want to be a scribe? And if you follow politics, you'll know that local people don't like to be scribes because you have to note everything that is discussed. And I said, well, I want to sit at the table, so I'll be a scribe. I became the most vocal scribe they have ever had. Subsequently, I was elected as the chairperson. I helped in a project that's helped about 15,000 children in Gauteng in particular. And that's when I made the decision, you know what, this is a different avenue that can be used to help people. And all of that started when I got my matric results the first time, and they were not what I had expected them to be. And this subsequently set me on a path towards leadership. When everything that I do, what is my driving force, it keeps me up at night. If I was not limited by the human need to eat or sleep or rest, I'd be working 24/7, because I firmly believe that we have the ability to do so much more and to help so many people. And this is where it started for me as far as leadership is concerned.
This is Love SA. This is Love SA through Bold Moves Radio. One thing unique about this show, we let our guests share and pour out from the bottom of their hearts and soul those stories that we seek to see spread throughout the country to encourage others in their private spaces to do more, to ensure that we don't just wait and call upon our government, because we are the government ourselves, to ensure that this country becomes what we all want to see it becoming. And this is Mr. David Kabwa, who is with us. It's a patriotic movement. We don't do it alone. We do it together with you. And what you can pick up from what he has just said, among other things, is that your attitude, as it's always said, your attitude determines your altitude. Now, he got his matric results, disappointed, but the way he reacted to that was very decisive. It had to decide whether he goes down the street as someone who has failed, or he decides to make sure that he wakes up and rolls up his sleeves and work much harder and look at where he comes from and says, where did it go wrong? And he could then decide that, you know what, I can identify where it all went wrong, and this is where it all went wrong, and I need to work on those areas to make sure that I get my results. And that's what exactly he did, and look where he is today. It's not always the case that you should expect things to go your way. Your way might not be the way God has planned that. God might have said to himself that you need a couple of 2 more days before you could get to where your friends or past where your peers are. And that is what exactly has happened with Mr. David Kabwa. We thank you, sir, and we really appreciate what you are sharing with us. But now we want to delve into your tertiary institution life. Everything else that you have done is very important, but we want to delve into that, seeing that time is not or may not be on our side. Now, here you are doing your second year at University of Pretoria. You decide to get into a contestation for leadership, and you did that as an independent candidate, and you emerged victorious, and you became the president of the Student Representative Council. And I can just imagine how hectic the preparations, how impossible it looked for someone who was looking from outside, but living up to your name as a Goliath of our time. You came out victorious. Now, I want to find out from you, and I think our viewers as well would want to find out that the decision that you took, that you are going independent, and especially during your second year, was it a question of you having looked around for a possible association with any of the student bodies at the campus, and you said to yourself, I don't see any that I can associate myself with that can lead me into what I want to become, or the institution becoming what I want it to become, because we are speaking transformation at tertiary institutions. It actually reminds me, I must say, of one founder of a sports vehicle that is still doing extremely well across the globe, that he says the story behind the coming up with an idea to manufacture this vehicle, and I must say it's Porsche. He said he looked for a sports car, he looked around, he couldn't find any of his dream, and he decided to manufacture one for himself. And one maybe can put in Dr. Mangosuthu Buthelezi when he was at some point asked during early 90s as to why, looking at the alleged conflict between ANC and Inkatha Freedom Party, the question was put to him that you cut your political career teeth within the ANC, and Inkatha started as a cultural organization. What is it that is there that makes it impossible for you and other leaders, as Black leaders, to join forces together as a united front to see to it that you take the masses into their promised land, which is the constitutional order that we are in today? And in his answer, he said, where there is no development, there's no difference in opinion, there is no development. Would you say that you share something with the founder of Porsche in deciding to come up with an idea of manufacturing a sports car of his dream? Would you say that, like Dr. Mangosuthu Buthelezi, if there's no difference in opinion and there cannot be progress, that this account for you taking the bull by its horn, going independent and victoriously in line with your name, you emerged?
I appreciate that. The short answer is yes. Yes, that's exactly the case. When I first arrived at the University of Pretoria, I wanted to contest for SRC president. I was then informed that as a first-year student, I don't qualify. So I asked what's the next best thing, and they said, well, run for the chair of your faculty, which at the time, as a first-year student, was also considered impossible. Grateful to have done that. So as a first-year chairperson, I was watching how students were dealing with issues in the beginning of the year, and had seen there was one party that held seats in the SRC and another one did not. So there was a young man, I'll never forget this, who came from KZN. His mother took the last money that she had, sent him on a bus to Pretoria under the hope that he might find something. This was a young man who didn't even know how to use a computer. So you can imagine he was not able to apply. So the party that was not in the SRC took this young man, brought him to the dormitory where the sitting SRC was sleeping in the evening, and just kind of left him there. And they kept him in a space for about 8 hours, just waiting for the opportune moment to drop off this young man. And I remember watching this, asking myself, how many people fall in the cracks when we are busy with our squabbles? So I subsequently decided I'm going to do something about this, and I decided to contest for the SRC presidency. And as an independent at the time, it was considered political suicide. For about 8 months, I had people telling me, well, this is an impossibility. But as I mentioned in the beginning, the greatest talent any human being possesses is hard work. So I got out and started speaking to people. On an average day, I spoke to about 300 students a day. So I physically go and shake 300 hands every day during the campaign. It gave me a very intimate understanding of what the issues were, and I'm grateful to have had a successful term. I have been re-elected, the first person ever to have that privilege. When I had left office, there was actually a petition started for me to come back for a third term. Now, the Constitution doesn't allow this, and I felt it would demonstrate a lack of prudence to change the Constitution just for one person to come back. And funny enough, I had also intended to contest independent at the national level. It was unfortunate, the manifestation of the current electoral amendment bill. It is why I have subsequently decided to start my own political formation. But my modus operandi has never been to view any other entity as an enemy. I think we all simply have the same goal, and we have different perspectives on how to achieve that goal. In both my terms as SRC president, I was voted SRC member of the year, and I was voted by colleagues in other political parties. So in my view, regardless of your background and your point of origin, we have a common interest in pushing others forward. We can do it. And like the great influences that you have mentioned, when a space doesn't exist, I believe that we do have the capacity to stand up and not only get a seat at the table, but take our own chairs, put it at the table, and be fruitful in finding a collective effort moving forward.
That is Mr. David Kabwa with us, and this is a patriotic movement. We couldn't help but let him carry on, and now it is that time that we need to take a commercial break. We have got a few bills that we need to settle, and we can only be able to carry on next week and weeks to come thereafter, provided we do our sales extremely well. And this is that time that we are taking a commercial break as we allow our guests to take a sip of water into our second half as we come back from the other side of the
Good evening once again. We welcome you back. And the program is Bold is Love SA at Bold Moves Radio. We're broadcasting live on Facebook and on YouTube. Mr. Kabwa, welcome back. We thank you once again for your time.
Very grateful. Always a pleasure.
Look, Mr. Kabwa, I have to say you have a very interesting CV. Your achievements at this very young age that you're at right now are very much interesting. And one cannot shy away from asking yourself the question, where does you find the time to do all this? I mean, looking at all your achievements, I couldn't help but entertain the phrase, leaders are born and not made. What is your comment on that? And I'm asking this because your life as we know it, as you have briefly described a couple of minutes ago, it appears to be characterized by having accomplished the unattainable when one uses age as a factor. What do you have to say to that?
Right, I appreciate that. Once again, a very brilliant question. I don't subscribe to the school of thought that leaders are born and not made, because my view, one of my biggest beliefs, is the following phrase, and I think this is one of the most powerful phrases that any human being can utter. And that is that life is a matter of decision. And when we are willing to make a decision, this sets us on a path. Now, when we start to see people who might be more inclined towards leadership, it often emanates from the point where someone has identified something that does not sit well with them, or an issue that needs to be addressed, and subsequently makes the decision to address that issue in whatever capacity might exist. And on your point about youth in particular, I think it is one of the most important facets. If I think back to a lot of the great contributors throughout history, a lot of them were youth. If you look at most major movements in just about any country in the world, a lot of it started from students, from young people, from people who are willing to exercise their thoughts and turn those thoughts into actions, and those actions into bettering the reality around us. So I hold the firm belief that a misconception that we have is often around what is a leader. And based on how we define it, some might agree and some might disagree with whether or not leaders are considered to be born or made. I believe that there are four kinds of leadership. The first is activism. And activism is normally a more kind of disruptive element, which is often necessary to facilitate change. There is then what we call active citizen, and these are those of us who are able to mobilize within our communities. There are the change makers, and these are normally those who stand up and decide to often be the first towards creating a contribution to society that did not exist before. And then lastly, there's what we call the reformer. And the reformer is often he who sits at the table, who negotiates for things to change. And in a society, you need all four forms of leadership for things to truly manifest towards bettering society as a whole. And this has been my view, is what I firmly believe in. I view that all of us can be leaders in our own space. I believe that to lead, one must be willing to understand that the greatest leader is the most humble servant. Therefore, leadership is an act of service, and an act of service manifests itself in many different formations.
Absolutely. I think you've answered the question brilliantly, because I found out something interesting, that scientific studies indicate that at least leadership is 30% genetic and 70% learned. And what you've just alluded to right now kind of gives credence to what this statement says. But I want to bring into the picture some words which you said. It was during the 200 young South Africans with Mail and Guardian, and I'm sure you will remember this passage. And it says, as time passes, it becomes more apparent that a career in politics needs to start when you are young and be driven by a passion for helping people. And my specific focus is there on the last statement where it says, be driven by a passion for helping people. Now, I want to zoom in into your campaign towards your SRC presidency. And having won the seat of SRC president in one of South Africa's most prestigious universities as an independent candidate, for that matter, and by a significant margin, what do you think made you stand out from the rest of the well-established and funded student movements?
That's a really good question, and you bring up an excellent point there. To give you an idea, I spent 500 Rand on my first campaign and about 700 Rand on my second campaign. That was literally petrol money to go and visit different campuses. I did not have the resources of larger organizations, and even now, as I'm entering the national sphere, the same can be said. But I believe what is most important is a connection with people. When I was campaigning, so many students that I spoke to said, well, you're the first candidate that I've seen who's actually taken the time to listen to me but also to come and to speak to me. And that personal connection, I think, is a very important facet of leadership. I think the biggest misconception was we have an idea and a blueprint of how politics should work. My view is that you can design your own blueprint. So I did not run my campaign according to any of the regular conventions or traditions. Funny enough, I ran what I call a promise-free campaign because I recognize that a lot of the promises that we make are very lofty, and I'd much rather be honest with people. So my approach was, well, you help me identify an issue, and I will work my hardest to ensure that we address that issue. And it became very feasible once I got into office because as opposed to chasing bullet points on a manifesto, I would simply engage students who brought issues to my attention, work hard to solve those issues, but more so understanding that there is no need for us to make enemies within the space of political engagement. I worked very well with every major political organization on campus. We had regular meetings. I brought them into the fold and I viewed them as my allies. And regardless of what was said or shared, I believe that we had a common interest. And this is still a view that I hold today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Mr. David. To our listeners and viewers, this is David Kabwa, the president of MOVE Political Party, a two-time independent SRC president of the University of Limpopo. Kabwa MANGANYI, I want to bring you into the conversation right now. And I'm sure our listeners may be taking away that the fact that scientific research, as I indicated, shows that at least 30% leaders are born or is genetic, and 70% is learned. And that tells us greatly that anyone in their own right, given the determination and the passion for whatever area that they want to be, can actually lead. Kabwa MANGANYI, over to you.
Thank you, Ngobeni. I must say, Mr. Kabwa, we have seen and we continue to witness a mass protest across all institutions in the country, and that results in the loss of valuable tuition time. Now, reading your PhD in mediation that you are currently busy with, do you think that the mediation would have a role to play as a pinnacle to resolve or to avoid occurrences such as these that we have become so used to, especially at the beginning of the year, that students will take up to the streets in protest against what they claim to be a continuation of the status quo by the management universities across the country?
I appreciate that, and I think it's a very, very profound question, so I really must commend you on that. Yes, I do think mediation plays a very big role. And I think it's important to understand and know that mediation is a process, and it is a process that is segmented. And by that I mean there are very many stages. One thing that has helped me greatly during my time was understanding that my view, and the view that I still hold today, is that management is not the enemy. And the reason why I highlight this is because it's always been my view that we all want to solve these issues. I do not believe that any institution at a managerial level wants to have continuous protests every year. And as students, we are frustrated because we don't want to be dealing with the same issues at the beginning of each year. So what we find is that we've developed a dichotomy, and it's a binary dichotomy in that either you are on our side or you are not on our side. Now, the difference here lies in that a lot of managerial structures believe that what they're doing is best for students. I think a lot of evidence has demonstrated that in many instances, this is not the case. And what that does is it has created the view that perhaps students may be antagonistic towards efforts made to assist them. And on the side for us as students, there is the notion that, well, we are not understood and we cannot wait because our matters are burning and our matters are present and our matters are current. And I think when we start to understand the role of mediation, it is getting to the point where we understand that we need to get to compromise, and from compromise we can get to a consensus. And the only way to get there is to ensure that we treat each other with mutual respect. And I do think that for us as students, in many instances, the hot and burning desire has often manifested in approaches that have been viewed as very negative. And on the side of management, the same thing has been reciprocated. So essentially, we want the same thing, but we disagree on how to get there. And what we see in a lot of institutions of higher learning is that we have not yet reached the point where we come to understand that a lot of our goals are aligned. That's the very starting place of the proper mediation that brings us into a negotiation. And entering into a negotiation is to understand and recognize that in order for us to achieve this goal, there must be some give and some take. Now, if both opposing sides don't want to compromise at all, this is where we see a stalemate. This is where we see intransigence. But mediation does allow for us to open the door of conversation. This alludes back to the 4 types of leadership that I mentioned, because in many instances, protest action is necessary, because what it does is it raises awareness to issues. We will need the change makers in society who will come up with solutions. We will need the reformers who will sit at the table and allow for the actual negotiation to take place. And then we do need the active citizens in wider society to shine a light on what is happening so that it does not occur within a vacuum and within a silo. So in short, I do believe that mediation can greatly assist to address the issues that we have, because what it does is it allows us to develop foresight. When we sit at the table, we ask ourselves, how can we prevent what is happening from happening again in the future? And by coming into that space, we can begin to prepare. When we prepare, we can mitigate a lot of the issues that have resulted in a lot of the negative manifestations that we see in higher education. So I'll summarize it in this way. There is a lack of communication, it breeds misunderstanding. Misunderstanding breeds frustration, and frustration leads to conflict. And the best way to avoid that is to communicate. And mediation gets us to the point of communication.
That is Mr. David Kabwa with us, and we are running into our commercial break. But before that, I want to give him pose a question to him that he will answer when we come back from the commercial question. And the question quickly, Mr. Kabwa, is that comparatively speaking, looking at pre and post your role, which you want to assume as Prime Minister for Commonwealth Youth Parliament, what is it that South Africa can beneficially derive from your role and experience in that position? But that, and the answer there too, when we come from the other side of the break. That's how we come back from the commercial break, and with us, it's still Mr. David Kabwa. The question remains, Mr. Kabwa, would you take us through that in your answer as to what is it that South Africa can beneficially derive from your experience as the Prime Minister for Youth Parliament in the Commonwealth Parliament, rather?
Right, I really appreciate that. And once again, it's a really, really good question. So to begin, for those who may not be familiar, the Commonwealth of countries that were previously colonized by the British, these are about 54 different countries. And in this capacity, I was the first African elected. And what I did during my time was oversee the youth perspective, legislatively speaking, as it pertains to the Commonwealth. So a lot of the news and the bills that we had worked on were compiled and shared with the legislatures of various countries within the Commonwealth. Now, the experience that I gained through this role has allowed me to develop what I believe are three advantageous areas for young people, but also for South Africa as a whole. First is sharing my experience as far as leadership is concerned. And here I refer to the daily ongoing. For example, politics, we have what we refer to as lobbying, which is often trying to win different sides over to support a particular goal or initiative. It's a very important skill to have because you need to understand the nuances behind what drives different viewpoints, as well as what different characters might be more inclined towards. And currently I have over 54 different mentees all over the country and even across the continent as well. And these skills that I'm transferring to them, they are transferring to their mentees, and the chain continues. What we're seeing is a lot of skills development and capacity building programs that are coming from the experiences that I've had in the Commonwealth. That's the first advantage. The second advantage, and one that I'm very grateful for, is after this experience, I had worked with the Gauteng legislature to coordinate a lot of the programs within the youth sector parliament. So we've exposed a lot more young people, and particularly young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, to the parliamentary process and to the public participation process, where a lot of youth receive the opportunity to engage their leaders directly. This was also something that I had transferred to many schools, as I am very much in the habit of visiting schools and sharing as much as I can, where we would teach them about parliamentary debate. I would share this across television programs and the radio as well. And what we're seeing is that a lot of young people are beginning to develop critical thinking skills. And the advantage in that particular regard is that it enables greater understanding, so knowledge production of mechanisms that we can use to better our society then becomes very important. The third advantage, and one that I also think has been very, very great, is what I seek to do moving forward. I have a very deep and intricate knowledge of parliamentary systems, as well as how to ensure that they are effective. So as I move into the next stage of my life where I'm contesting for national office, I have a very unique advantage, having served at a local, national and international level, and within multilateral organizations as well. And this, I believe, will be a great benefit to South Africa as a whole, because what we need is leadership that is competent, leadership that is capable, and leadership that cares about the issues that are at hand.
Mr. Kabwa, as South Africans, our heads are up, but our spirits are low, especially when we look at our campuses across the country that have become increasingly violent, with students killing each other. But when you look at rape and murder, are so dangerously competing for a top spot in the list of atrocities that are taking place there. What could be those factors that account for this, and what could be a possible solution that we can look for to take this off the beautiful faces of our campuses?
Right, I really appreciate that. There's an old saying that wherever there is smoke, there is fire. So the starting place is always to identify what is causing the violence. And the most common answer is frustration. So we need to ask ourselves, all right, if frustration causes violence, and what is causing the frustration in the first place? And how do we better mitigate that? So to answer your question directly, what is causing a lot of the injustices that we are seeing in the institutions of higher learning is the frustration of what is referred to as structural violence. It is the inherent systemic nature of injustices that we see, where a lot of students come from disadvantaged backgrounds and communities. We are now exposed to a new environment, and oftentimes an environment that we may not find particularly welcoming. Now, there are those of us who are better capacitated than others, and those of us who would give in to our frustrations. And because of that, we become susceptible to voices and viewpoints that are not constructive, have very destructive tendencies. And our following those viewpoints often causes the very destruction that we see across institutions of higher learning. Another issue is the developmental phases that we went through before we got to institutions of higher learning. One of my projects is called the Boy Child Initiative, where I visit very many schools and I spend a lot of time with young boys trying to teach them about how to break cyclical violence. If we look at gender-based violence, it's an umbrella term. Within gender-based violence, there are very many different divisions. One of them is domestic violence. And the biggest victims of domestic violence in South Africa are young boys, which is why boys grow up to be the biggest perpetrators of gender-based violence, and something that we also begin to see in our institutions of higher learning. So what we need to do is identify what is the source behind the violence that we are seeing, and how do we mitigate that source. And to mitigate that source, we need to understand the origin of that source. And the origin of that source either comes from one's personal development or from exposure to an environment that one cannot acclimate to. So we can help students to better acclimate, and if we can ensure that the developmental process that young people undergo when they enter into universities are better streamlined, then this will greatly reduce the amount of conflict that we see in institutions of higher learning. This isn't something that can be done in silos. It is not even something that can be done by a single individual. It does take a collective effort. And again, this takes us back to the earlier conversation about mediation, because to accomplish this, communication becomes very key. So the solution lies in identifying, if we see smoke, where is the fire that is causing that smoke, and how do we put out that fire?
This actually reminds me of an article. I can't just remember exactly where I got it from, but I've got a part of that article which reads that transformation in the higher education sector will entail the creation of a system which is free from all forms of unfair discrimination and artificial barriers to access and success, as well as one that is built on the principles of social inclusivity, mutual respect, and acceptance. And but with this, I'm taking the baton and hand it over to Ngobeni to ask a question or two before we move on towards a conclusion of this program. But perhaps I need to ask you one question, because I know you already answered that question. You know, with our youth today, they think certain things are reserved for the adults that are at far advanced age. A direct question to you, and I'm known for direct questions. I cannot be said to have done justice to you if I don't ask you a question like this, especially in the light of the achievements that you have. Mr. Kabwa, the question is simple. As on the 20th of April 2023 at 1859, how old are you?
I am 26 years old.
Say it again.
I'm 26 years old.
We need to say it louder. He is 26 years old and he's reading for his PhD in mediation. That is Mr. Kabwa, the former two-term president of SRC at University of Pretoria. Ngobeni.
Well, Mr. Kabwa, that direct question leads me to ask another almost direct but not very direct. At age 26, studying towards your PhD, having accomplished everything that you've accomplished, a lot of students are drawing inspiration from you. Not only students, post-grads, those who are starting up their careers, or people in their different walks of life. What would you advise them? Where do you find all the time to do all this? At 26, I indicated at the beginning that if one uses age as a factor, they would say you've achieved what would be regarded as unattainable at this age. Where do you find the time? How do you balance all these tasks?
I appreciate that. It's a great question. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with our national spokesperson, where we tend to communicate in the very early hours of the morning. Now, my view is the following, that, we speak right now. I can look you in the eye and I can tell you, have the ambition of an ocean, because the depths of which cannot be measured. And you'll feel great, and you'll feel motivated, and you'll go home. But oftentimes when we leave such spaces, we have to face the reality of life. What's very important is to understand the following, that discipline will take you over the finish line when motivation is lacking. And the best way to develop skills of time management is to develop the skill of discipline. It takes a human being about 6 weeks to develop a habit. Therefore, it is the matter of being intentional and being intentional daily. You wake up, you will not feel like doing it. You wake up, you may be exhausted. You wake up and you may feel like going back to bed. But when you wake up and you take that decision and you take it on a daily basis and you stick to the decisions you take it and be willing to say that you cannot defeat me, you cannot deny me, you cannot disable me, and you cannot pull me back. This is where you will start to see the shift. And therefore, making daily decisions. This is where we start to see the changes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kabwa. In closing, on my side, I want to quote from a passage that are some words from a passage that I found a couple of weeks ago when we were trying to connect with you. And it goes, I've held more portfolios than I can count. Each time I was reminded of the weight carried by each decision as it affects the people who placed me where I am. And in my closing comments, I would like to say I was deeply touched by these words. I found them to be very profound for the simple reason that if I look at our political landscape at this day and age, this is what is lacking from the conscience of our leaders. To be reminded at each and every time of the weight of the decisions that they take, because it directly impacts the constituency, and that is the people who put them in places of leadership. Mangani, what are your closing comments? We are out of time.
We are definitely out of time, but our executive producer will understand why we have to spill over into this hour, because it's not just a guest that we have, but it's a special guest, a 26-year-old PhD in mediation reading, Mr. Kabwa, that we are with. And Mr. Kabwa, with this, I come to this point that I find myself with no choice but to quote a quote that I normally, or I'm notorious for paraphrasing from NTSHEMBO, from one of his greatest works, Things Fall Apart. That is the name of the book, and paraphrased the part that I normally go for. It goes, if a child washes his hands, he can dine with adults. And here you are at the age of 26. You have seen many things, you have gone through many. We look forward to a lot of things happening, things that will beneficially go the way of South Africa, the continent at large, and of course, the global village. With these words, Mr. Kabwa, we are saying to you, say something to our listeners about the political party that we have formed. What is the vision and the mission that it stands for? What difference does it bring about in relation to what people have now grown so used to, given the political parties that are there in existence in the country?
I really appreciate that. And it's important to note that as a political party, we are by young people, we are for young people, we value intergenerational dialogue. We believe that youth are not only the future, youth are the present. Youth right now are competent and capable to take up the space and to make a meaningful contribution. And MOVE is founded on 3 values, and that is servant leadership, diligence, and determination. And all of this is underpinned by the notion of good governance. If we have leaders that can understand that the call to leadership is to serve people, who are dedicated in their efforts to do so, and who remain diligent in ensuring that we achieve the objectives that have been laid before us, we can achieve good governance. Good governance bleeds into every single sector because it starts to ensure that we have proper management, proper oversight, and a great ability to deliver what people need. So I encourage you right now, go check out www.move-za.com and you can find out more. It's your move, South Africa. So move with us and lead with us.
That is Mr. David Kabwa. And on my parting shot, when we speak of definition of youth today, there should be no technical definition as it was sometime in the past, which made sense. I remember one political youth leader at some point who was over the age of 40 was asked, but look, you are above 40, but you still consider yourself youth. And technically, he gave a definition, which was good at the time when he said that a youth in the context of South African politics is anyone, irrespective of his age, who at the time that he was supposed to enjoy his youth was politically denied that opportunity. But today, I wish that it be a formal ending of that technical definition. When we speak of youth, we speak of youth as someone in the context of the likes of Mr. David Kabwa. With that, that's how we come to an end of our today's beautiful show, Love SA. And we thank you, our listeners and viewers across all social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube, for having loyally once again joined us this evening. Look forward to the next guest next week, same time. And you should have no regret as we always bring you dynamic guests and speakers. Mr. Kabwa, good night, and our listeners, thank you very much.
Streaming 24/7. 24/7.
Bold Moves Radio.
Bold Moves Radio.
Afrika, nakupenda sana.